One broken woman walked into the storm that night, but it was the dog who found her first. A blizzard screamed through the Oregon wilds, blanketing every trail, silencing every cry. While the world slept, one wounded German shepherd stood guard at the edge of the trees, ears lifted, breath steady. Somewhere in that white abyss, a mother and her two babies were dying. No one else saw the faint drag of footprints. No one else dared step into the cold. But he did. And what he led his master to would unravel a buried legacy, expose the cruelty of bloodlines, and spark a love that had long forgotten how to begin again. This is the story of a faithful dog, a grieving soldier, and a mother who refused to disappear. A story about loyalty, survival, and the kind of family you choose at the end of the world. Before we begin, tap that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you don't miss the stories that'll wreck and rebuild your heart, one paw print at a time. Black Hollow, Wyoming, 3:14 a.m., temperature 18 degrees Celsius, east wind 37 m/h, visibility 30 feet. The sky cracked open over Black Hollow like a vow broken in silence. Snow fell in waves thick as smoke, and the wind dragged the forest into a fitful moan. In the distance, the river had frozen over. The trees stood like sentinels wrapped in frost, and the stars had vanished behind steel-gray clouds. From the towering Redgrave estate, a figure stepped out into the white. Maren Oakes, 26, barefoot, wrapped in nothing but a threadbare shawl, carried two crying newborns against her chest. Her once vibrant auburn hair clung in frozen strands to her cheeks. Her lips were cracked and colorless, her brown eyes hollow with exhaustion, and fury barely blinked as the wind ripped at her dress. Inside the manor, the fire had long gone out. So had sympathy. Jude Redgrave had died just 3 months earlier, her husband the favored son of the richest family in Black Hollow. And when the blood test quietly confirmed what they feared, Maren's children were his, but conceived before their marriage, the illusion of Redgrave dignity shattered, and with it, her welcome. "You are not family," Jude's mother, Sarah Redgrave, had told her. A statuesque woman in her 60s, tall and gaunt, with silver-streaked hair, always pulled into a severe bun. Sarah had once been gracious and poised, beloved at charity balls and winter festivals, but Jude's death hardened her like frozen glass, shattering warmth, keeping only sharp edges. "You'll find shelter somewhere," Sarah said without looking up. "If not, well, that's not our concern." At her side, standing motionless near the stairs, was Catherine Redgrave, Sarah's daughter, Jude's younger sister. She was 23, pale with long black hair that hung like a curtain over one shoulder. Catherine never contradicted her mother, but that night as Maren stood trembling, Catherine slipped something into the basket the butler carried, a small woolen blanket, hand-knitted in navy blue. It was the same blanket Jude had used as a child. Catherine didn't say anything. Her lips remained tight, but her eyes met Maren's briefly green-wide, quietly aching. Her way of saying, "I can't stop them, but I haven't forgotten you." The front door shut behind Maren with a sound like the end of a prayer. Across the road, inside a small wooden house nearly buried under snow, Walter Bailey stood at his window, clutching the sill. Walter was 74, thin as fence wire, with a back curved from years in the postal service, and one glass eye that saw more than most thought. He had outlived his wife, his job, and most days his purpose, but not his memory. Tonight his hands trembled around a chipped coffee mug as he watched Maren, barefoot shaking, descend the icy stairs of the Redgrave estate carrying her twins. He moved as if to reach for his coat, then stopped. His joints wouldn't make it 10 steps in that snow. He muttered a curse under his breath, blinked tears from his good eye, and whispered toward the storm. Lord, keep her moving. Maren did not know where she was going, only away. Downhill across the clearing into the woods that led to nowhere, but frozen streams and forgotten cabins. The babies whimpered, then quieted. That silence terrified her. She clutched them tighter, whispering lullabies she could barely remember. "Mama's here. Just sleep. Please." The shawl Catherine gave her flapped in the wind, thin as paper. Her feet, already bloodied, left red stains in the white snow. She lost all feeling below the knees. Still she walked, and somewhere not far from the tree line, a pair of eyes opened. The wolf-shaped silhouette stood at the ridge above the clearing, silent as stone. Bristle, a 5-year-old German shepherd with dark sable fur, and an old scar down his left shoulder, watched from beneath a snow-covered pine. Once trained as a search and rescue dog in Alaska, Bristle had belonged to no one for the past 2 years. After surviving an avalanche that took his handler and his team, he had wandered deep into forests avoiding human voices, but not forgetting them. Tonight, something stirred in him. He had been resting in a hollow, dug near a rotting log, when he heard it first. The cry of wind, then something sharper, infant cries, inconsistent fading. The scent reached him next, human, female, sharp with blood, fear. Bristle lifted his head. His breath came out in white puffs. His ears flicked toward the clearing. He padded forward, slowly blending into the shadows. Branches cracked under his weight, but the wind swallowed the sound. His powerful frame, lean and long, moved with practiced caution, and then he saw her. Marin collapsed just inside the tree-lined knees, buckling as snow welcomed her like a coffin. The babies barely stirred. She curled herself around them, instinctively becoming a wall of flesh between them and the night. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "I'm so sorry." She didn't hear the soft crunch of snow behind her. Didn't see the pair of amber eyes watching from the brush, unmoving. Bristle stood still, head lowered, tail neutral. Not predatory, not afraid, only alert, studying. He didn't approach, not yet. But something changed in his gaze, the flicker of memory, of purpose, of training not quite forgotten. He took one step forward, then another. Snow shifted beneath his paws. The scent grew stronger. The babies made no sound. Bristle lifted his head and raised his snout toward the wind. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He barked, once, short, sharp, echoing through the storm like a beacon. Then silence. He barked again, louder this time, then stood still, waiting. The night had teeth. It tore at the trees, raked across the drifts, and bit into the seams of every door and black hollow. By 4:00 a.m., the storm had become a growl, relentless, hungry. Somewhere deep in the trees west of the Redgrave estate, a single bark echoed once, then again, and then it faded. Inside a small cabin tucked beneath a ridge of blackened pines, Gideon Rourke startled awake. He was used to silence. It had been his companion for nearly 7 years. But this sound, the second bark, was sharp enough to carve through sleep. He sat upright on the edge of the bed, eyes adjusting to the shadows, heart already sensing something beyond ordinary. Bristle didn't bark, unless it mattered. Gideon stood broad-shouldered and slow-moving, like a man who used to be fast. His graying beard covered a jaw made firm by solitude. 42, with hands calloused from building his own roof and burying more than one memory, Gideon wasn't the kind to scare easy. But urgency came in waves. Bristle's third bark had that tremble in it, like a signal to run. And so he did. Boots coat, emergency satchel, a flashlight, a rope. Bristle met him at the door, eyes gleaming, fur streaked with snow. He turned without a word and bolted into the white. The forest swallowed them quickly. The snow was thigh-deep and the path barely visible, but Bristle led the way without falter. Gideon trusted him more than most humans. The dog's instincts had never once failed. Not back in Anchorage, not in the Sierra Avalanche, not even in the quiet years after they had both disappeared from the world. 10 minutes into the trek, Gideon saw something ahead, an unnatural mound in the snow, still and half buried under frost. He dropped to his knees. At first he couldn't make sense of the shape. Then a threadbare shawl stiffened with ice. Bare arms. A woman. And there 2 babies wrapped against her chest, their tiny faces barely visible beneath the frozen cloth. His stomach clenched. He recognized the woman, vaguely Marin Oak's Jude Redgrave's widow. She looked near death. Blue lips. Frost-bitten fingers curled stiff around her children. Her body shielding them even in unconsciousness. "Jesus," Gideon whispered. "She never let go?" He peeled back one side of the wrap gently. One baby alive, faint breath visible. The other colder still, but not gone. He worked fast, wrapping all 3 in thermal blankets from his pack, activating the heat packs, layering emergency plastic over their forms. Marin never stirred. Her eyes remained shut. Her pulse there, but barely. Her body had gone into a death-shielding reflex, her arms locked even in unconsciousness, refusing to release her children. "She's hanging by a thread," he muttered. He slung the bundles carefully into his rope harness, tied them to his front, and began the hike back, slow, deliberate, every step watched by Bristle. Back at the cabin, the fire had died down, but the stove still breathed heat. Gideon burst through the door, snow flying from his coat. He laid Maren on the cot, her arms still partially frozen in their curved position. The babies went into a padded basket lined with fur closer to the fire. He worked silently, rhythmically. He'd done this before. Warm cloths on frozen skin, stimulate the fingers, hot water bottle near the heart, never on limbs. Drape in layers, small doses of warmed sugar water for the babies, spoon-fed drop by drop. Gideon's fingers moved with memory. This was what he was trained to do once, before Clara. His eyes flicked toward Bristle curled on the floor, now near the fire. Watching. Always watching. "You remember that mountain too, don't you?" he said quietly. 3 years ago, an avalanche took Gideon's daughter Clara during a rescue mission he insisted on leading. She'd begged to come, and he'd let her. She died in his arms after they found the last survivor. No amount of training prepares you for losing a heartbeat you helped create. He turned back to Maren. Her skin had gone from icy white to a dull bluish hue, dangerous, but it meant blood still flowed. He began massaging her fingers gently. "Come on, don't let this be where it ends." He couldn't say why, but he felt that this woman had wanted to die, and yet hadn't. He placed her arms at her sides, laid warm bricks near her feet. Slowly her chest began to rise slightly more with each breath, still unconscious, but no longer fading. "She's not giving up," he muttered. The babies made small whimpering sounds. Still alive, still holding on. Outside, the storm quieted, but only barely. The trees creaked under the weight of snow. Somewhere in the distance, an owl gave a single hoot, then fell silent. Inside, Gideon lit another log in the stove and sank into the old wooden chair beside the cot. He didn't sleep. Meanwhile, near the edge of Redgrave property, Walter Bailey stood beneath the iron lantern post. He'd spent hours watching the trail disappear into the woods, waiting to see if someone might return. But no one came, only wind and white. His old boots slipped once on the ice, and he muttered a curse. But he saw something, then a faint pair of tire tracks near the edge of the pine grove almost erased by snowfall. They led into the deep woods toward the north slope, no roads there. No hunting cabins, just forest. Walter didn't follow, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out a long red handkerchief. He tied it to a fence post, made a notch in the bark with his pocket knife, then whispered, "If someone finds her, it'll be that dog." Inside the cabin, Bristle finally moved. He stood padded silently over to the cot and laid down beside Maren's still form. His breath synced with hers, slow, steady watching, like he'd done once before with Gideon, when his leg had been shattered and his spirit nearly broken. It was his way of saying, "You're not alone now." It began with a whisper, not from lips, but from the fire, from breath, from muscle that dared stir beneath the weight of cold. Maren Oaks drifted upward through a fog of darkness and snow, drawn by warmth not just of firelight, but of something older, more primitive, a tether she didn't recognize but instinctively trusted, the kind of warmth that didn't scald but waited, patient. Unafraid of the ice clinging to the edges of her spirit, her eyelids fluttered open. At first there was only blurred light and a rough-hewn ceiling. Her breath caught in her throat. Then pain arrived, dull dragging everywhere. Her fingers ached, her spine throbbed, and her chest still burned with the phantom weight of the babies. Her arms shot forward in panic. "They're safe," the voice startled her. Deep, measured, calm like water over stone. She turned her head too fast, winced, and then saw him. A man stood near the stove, spooning something into a pot. He looked like he belonged to the forest, broad-shouldered, flannel-draped face weathered by cold and grief alike, salt and pepper beard trimmed, but grown long at the chin. His eyes were gray, not cold but unreadable. He didn't rush to explain himself. He simply waited. "Where?" Myron croaked. "You're in my cabin," the man said. "Name's Gideon. Gideon Rourke. The dog found you." At the sound of his name, Bristle lifted his head from beside her cot. His dark eyes were alert but soft, and his ears perked up when she looked at him. Unlike most German shepherds, he was smaller and leaner, scarred on his left flank, where the fur never quite grew back right. His tail gave a subtle wag. Maren blinked, then her hand slowly with effort reached toward the dog's head. Bristle stepped forward and gently laid his chin on the edge of the blanket. And just like that, the panic slipped back. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the man had stepped closer. "You were in the snow for hours," he said. "Your kids' twins, I'm guessing, were hypothermic, but they're recovering. You, less so, but you're stubborn. That helped." Marin tried to sit up. Gideon stopped her with a gentle palm. "Not yet. You need fluids rest. There's broth coming. The babies, Rowan and Elia." Her eyes darted across the room. "They're right here," Gideon said, and nudged the wooden cradle closer to the cot with his boot. "Safe, sleeping." Marin exhaled. The sound cracked and her shoulders shook. Gideon didn't speak again for a long while. He placed a warm mug near her hands and stepped back. She took a sip. Her throat burned in thanks. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a white hush in its wake. Gideon pulled on his thick coat gloves and a sling pack with traps. He stepped outside into a world that looked reborn. The sun glinted off crusted branches like the forest had been dipped in glass. He headed west his usual trap line. The snow was thick but packed. Bristle had cut a path the day before that still showed faintly. But as Gideon neared the edge of the ridge, something caught his eye. A glint, out of place. He crouched. There, half embedded in a hoofprint-like depression, was a button, metal. Ornate. Definitely not from any coat he owned. He lifted it, turning it in his fingers. A snowflake landed on the edge and melted instantly. There were footprints too, not his, not Bristle's, human, recent. Someone else had been tracking. Maybe after Bristle, maybe toward the same trail. He scanned the trees. Nothing moved. Still his instincts didn't lie. Someone was watching, he muttered, and they weren't alone. He pocketed the button. Back at the cabin, the fire crackled low. Marin had managed to shift herself up, propped on pillows. She listened to the silence around her, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but lived in. The cradle beside her let out a tiny whimper. She leaned over, gently touched her son's forehead. Warm now. Still so pale but pink, returning to the cheeks. Across the room, a strange whir sounded soft, mechanical. Marin turned her head. An old reel-to-reel tape recorder sat on the far shelf. Dust clung to its top, but the reel spun slowly now. She hadn't seen Gideon touch it, hadn't noticed it before. But it played. And a voice floated out. A woman's voice, singing. Soft. Southern lilt. Broken but beautiful. The river don't rise for the wicked child. But it always carries the lost. Marin's heart jumped. The lullaby, old-fashioned aching. She didn't know the tune, but something in it tightened her throat. Had someone turned it on, or was it automated? She didn't move. Just listened. Her fingers gripped the blanket. Bristle, now lying near the hearth, flicked one ear and let out a low whine. As if he remembered. The song ended. The reels slowed, then silence again. Marin looked around. No one there. Just ghosts. Far from the cabin, Walter Bailey sat on his porch step, sharpening a small hunting knife with slow, practiced rhythm. His weathered hands moved without looking. His gaze was fixed toward the northern line of pines. The same direction the button had fallen. The same trail he'd marked with a red handkerchief. He muttered something to himself, too quiet for the wind to carry, and waited. The wind had shifted again. It blew now from the east, carrying a scent that didn't belong. A scent Bristle had not detected since his time in the ravines outside Juneau, when men with rifles and stale breath moved through forests pretending to hunt game, but really tracking ghosts. This scent was sharp chemical, like gun oil and rubber boots. Foreign. Bristle stood still on the porch of Gideon's cabin, his breath a plume in the winter air. His ears were prick-tail held low, but tense. The snow around the cabin, once undisturbed, now bore faint impressions, just enough to rouse the unease in his chest. Inside, the quiet had thickened. Gideon was finishing repairs on a loose window shutter, using an old hammer that had belonged to his father. He noticed Bristle's posture and stiffened. Years of mountain rescue search operations and clandestine nights guarding perimeter lines in his military past taught him to trust the dog's reactions over any instinct of his own. "You smell something, boy?" Bristle gave a low, muffled growl. Without a word, Gideon dropped the hammer, reached for his coat, and slung the hunting rifle across his shoulder, not pointed, just present. He followed Bristle's tracks into the deep snow. The shepherd moved with purpose, head low, weaving through bare-limbed trees like smoke. They reached a ridge near the western slope, past the frozen creek. That's where they saw it, dried mud atop snow, partially melted with distinct boot treads not belonging to Gideon or any forestry ranger. Someone had been here, more than once. Miles away back in the sprawling Redgrave estate, perched above the valley like a monument to inheritance, Garrison. Redgrave stood before a roaring hearth in his drawing room. Garrison was a man carved from marble, and Manners tall, square-jawed, always dressed in pressed flannel and tailored vests that stank faintly of cigar ash and cedar oil. In his late 50s, he commanded rooms the way generals commanded trenches with entitlement. Across from him sat a man in an olive-green jacket, thick mustache, and weather-scarred skin, Clyde Jorston, a bounty hunter from Montana with no use for law books. He'd worked every kind of manhunt from skip bailouts to rural custody retrieval. What made him dangerous wasn't his aim, but his silence. Clyde could track a coyote across stone. "Find her," Garrison said flatly. "I don't care how far she's gone. That woman took my grandsons." Clyde didn't blink. "And make sure she's breathing when you do." Outside the room, a more cautious figure paced quietly down the hall, Catherine Redgrave, the youngest daughter of the clan. In her early 30s, Catherine had inherited none of Garrison's ruthlessness, but all of her late mother's discernment. Her frame was delicate thin as a reed in winter wind. Her eyes were sharp, but always scanning as if waiting for the world to fall apart again. She paused outside the door to her childhood bedroom, where she'd spent the last 2 nights writing anonymous letters by candlelight. Letters not of vengeance, but of justice. The latest one addressed to the Madison County Sheriff's Office sat sealed in her coat pocket. Inside, it read, "A woman and her twins have gone missing under suspicious circumstances from the Redgrave property. It is my belief they were not given shelter after her husband's death. Please investigate." She would drop it into the blue box outside the feed store that evening. For now, she tucked the envelope closer to her heart and disappeared into the snow. Back at the cabin, Marin stirred. She had slept longer than she realized, and now the crackle of the fire and smell of boiling roots filled the space. The cradle beside her rocked gently. She rose, moving carefully on bandaged feet toward a nearby shelf. It was there wedged between a stack of yellowing forestry books and a chipped oil lamp, a small leather-bound journal, its edges softened by time and hands long gone. She opened it. The handwriting was firm, slanted. Feminine, yet precise. January 17th. The smoke woke me again. Second time this month. He says it's the flu, but I don't think it is. I've seen the way the neighbor watches our place. The one with the limp. The one Gideon served with. He won't say it, but I know something followed him home from that unit. Something hungry. The entry was signed, Clara. Marin's breath caught. This was Clara Rourke Gideon's wife, the woman whose voice had whispered lullabies through the tape machine days before. She read further. March 2nd, I found the gasoline can moved again. He says I worry too much, but I feel like I'm living inside someone's vengeance. Another entry more frantic May 9th. The fire started at the barn, but spread too fast. Gideon's leg is healing, but he won't talk. Bristle won't leave his side. I keep thinking someone meant for us to burn. The journal stopped abruptly after that. Marin stared at the final page, her fingers trembling. She felt like she was trespassing through a life that never healed, a life too wounded to speak for itself anymore. Suddenly, a faint rustle by the door. She turned quickly. No one, only the wind, or maybe something more. Out in the woods, Gideon marked the boot prints with a small strip of red cloth, tying it to the nearest pine branch. His military training hadn't dulled. He could track men through fog if need be. He knew these were no accident. Whoever they were circling. He returned to the cabin with eyes sharpened by storm. Bristle lingered behind for a few seconds longer, sniffing the base of a tree where the scent was strongest. His ears twitched and his tail lowered. The snow had fallen again overnight, heavy, silent, almost mournful. It blanketed the forest like a burial shroud, softening every noise, muting the very breath of the wind. But beneath the stillness, movement stirred, urgent, desperate. A whisper of boots on packed snow, the faint click of a rifle being shouldered. Inside the cabin, Gideon worked quickly. His hands, calloused and precise, moved across the floorboards near the hearth. He removed the rag rug, then pried up a square of oak wood with a hidden hinge beneath. It groaned softly as it opened, revealing a narrow crawl space carved into the earth, barely high enough for a man to stoop. A tunnel Gideon had dug long ago, more from paranoia than need. Now it was salvation. "Take the boy," he said, handing Rowan swaddled and blinking sleepily to Marin. Marin, pale but steady, cradled him with one arm, while her other held Elia close to her chest. She wore one of Gideon's old coats, far too big sleeves cuffed up twice. Her hair, once sleek, now clung in wild frozen strands to her cheek. But her eyes had changed, no longer hunted, now they held fire. "I'm not leaving without you," she said. "You won't," Gideon answered. "I'll catch up, but someone's out there. And if they find the dog, they'll think he led you the other way." Bristle. The dog stood near the cabin's front door, already poised. His lean frame, streaked with soot and snow, trembled not from fear, but anticipation. His ears twitched as the wind carried faint bootsteps from the east. "He knows," Gideon whispered. Marin dropped into the tunnel, the boys wrapped tightly against her. Gideon replaced the panel above her head. In the dark, with only the faintest flicker of firelight between the floorboards, Marin felt the earth press close around her. Bristle gave one short bark, then bolted. Through snow-draped firs and skeletal aspens, Bristle ran. His breath came in bursts of steam, his paws slicing across ice and brush. He moved like a shadow, sharp and fast, doubling back, looping trails leading the scent astray. Behind him, the distant crack of branches, the rustle of pursuit, then snap. A wire trap, thin and nearly invisible, sprang up from the snow. Bristle cried out once, then silenced himself. Instantly, teeth clenched against the pain. The metal clamp dug into his rear leg, pinning him down. His sides heaved, chest pounding. Blood dotted the white beneath him. But he did not howl. He did not cry. He only lay still, ears still flicking, listening, waiting. Far below, Marin crawled. The tunnel was damp and low, supported by wooden beams every few feet. Her breath misted in front of her as she inched forward. Rowan whimpered quietly. She patted his back, her fingers numb, whispering nonsense lullabies to distract herself from the fear crawling up her spine. After 10 grueling minutes, she reached the end. Gideon had built it to open into the back slope of the hill, where a half-collapsed hunting blind camouflaged the exit. The sky above had turned pale gray, casting the world in shades of ash. She waited. When Gideon appeared a few minutes later, brushing mud from his coat and gripping a duffel of emergency supplies, she felt something like hope claw up her throat. "I laid down false tracks," he said. "If they've got dogs, we'll know soon." They pressed onward. Hours later, they stumbled across a structure veiled by pine boughs and snowdrift. An abandoned ranger station, forgotten since budget cuts years ago. Its roof sagged, windows cracked, but it still stood. Inside, dust coated everything like a second skin. The wood stove was rusted shut, but the back room, once an office, was dry and shielded from wind. Gideon lit a small lamp. As Myron laid the twins on a pile of folded blankets, her eyes wandered across the room. Maps, old permit logs, weather charts from decades ago. On the shelf, a dusty photograph leaned against a cracked mug. She picked it up. It showed a boy, 6 or 7, mop of blonde curls. A Redgrave smile, unmistakable. Next to him, an indigenous woman, her expression calm, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. The background looked like a reservation community center, maybe somewhere north. The boy, Jude, her late husband. Marin's pulse slowed, then quickened. He had never spoken of this woman, never mentioned childhood outside the family estate, and now staring at the photo, something clicked. The shape of Rowan's eyes, the olive tone of Elia's skin, hidden pieces that never fully aligned until now. Could this be the reason? Could the Redgrave's fury at her stem from the fact their grandchildren's heritage didn't fit the pristine image they guarded? She tucked the photo into her coat, her mind churning. Back in the woods, Bristle still lay near the trap. Snow had begun to fall again, powdering the blood around him. His body trembled with effort not to slip into unconsciousness. Then voices, not Gideon's. Rough, strained, 2 men. One older one rasping with a smoker's cadence. "I swear he came this way," one said. "No blood trail leads off. Damn dog just stopped here." A pause. Could be a trick. These shepherds are trained. Then the sharp sound of a boot connecting with Bristle's ribs. He didn't make a sound, only shuddered, but when they turned to search the nearby brush, Bristle, despite the pain, dragged himself an inch, then another, leaving the tiniest mark in the snow, leading them just a little farther, just enough. The ranger station creaked softly under the weight of snow as the wind outside whispered against the frosted windows. The fire in the corner stove had long since burned down to embers casting flickers of orange across the cabin walls. Marin sat cross-legged on the floor beside Bristle, a damp cloth in one hand, her palm hovering over his flank as if afraid to touch what might be broken. The German shepherd lay curled near the hearth, his back right leg wrapped in gauze and splinted with 2 pieces of kindling. His fur, usually thick and tawny, was now matted with dried blood and specks of ice. His breath came slow and steady, though each inhale trembled just slightly, almost as if he was holding pain in with discipline only an old soul would understand. Marin stroked his head gently. "You're the bravest thing I've ever seen," she whispered. Elia, the frailer of the twins, was tucked in a woolen nest nearby. He stirred often, fussing with tiny fingers curled against his cheek. Yet, whenever Bristle shifted even in sleep, the boy settled calmed by the warmth beside him. Rowan, sturdier and more curious, slept soundly near the wall, but it was Elia who kept one hand resting on Bristle's fur. Marin watched this with an ache she didn't have words for. In the darkness, she whispered, "You're his brother now." She smiled faintly. A big one with paws. Just past midnight, Gideon returned. His boots were caked in snow, his coat stiff with ice, and his beard carried frost like ash. He moved soundlessly through the doorway and paused when he saw them, Marin half asleep beside the fire, Bristle breathing shallow, Elia curled against the dog's ribs. He stood there for a long moment, then removed his coat and settled across from her. "Thank you," he said quietly, nodding toward Bristle. Marin didn't answer right away. "He saved us." Gideon rubbed his hands together. "He always does." For a moment, silence. Then she looked up, eyes catching the flicker of guilt in his face. "You want to tell me about him?" Gideon leaned back against the wooden wall and stared at the low ceiling. "I found Bristle outside Sitka 7 years ago. He was limping thin as wire running from a hunter's trap line. Someone left him behind, maybe because he flinched at gunshots, maybe because he wouldn't bite on command. Either way, he ran, found me instead. He saved someone she asked." He nodded slowly. "Once. A kid lost in the valley. Snowstorm hit hard real sudden. We were called in late. Bristle found him, kept him warm all night, but we didn't get there in time." A pause. "He died?" she asked. Gideon's jaw clenched. "Not the boy." "My daughter?" Marin froze. "She got sick after the fire," Gideon said. "The hospital couldn't figure it out. I kept thinking I could fix it. Find some herbal cure, move her to cleaner air. Clara stayed strong, but one night I left to look for medicine from a man in the next town. 20 miles. I was gone 5 hours. He looked up at her, his voice hoarse. She died before I came back." Marin didn't speak. She reached forward and placed her hand over his. Not to comfort, but to tell him, "You're not the only one who's lost something they can't bring back." Outside, the wind picked up again. After a while, Gideon rose and moved to an old wooden box beneath the window. He pulled out a harmonica, its metal edges dulled with time, and sat down beside the fire. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he began to play. It was a slow, wavering tune, half lullaby, half memory. The same one Marin had heard in the cabin days ago, crackling from the old tape recorder. A melody wrapped in Clara's voice now resurrected through Gideon's breath. As he played, Elia stirred slightly. His tiny fingers flexed against Bristle's fur, then stilled again. The moment felt like something sacred, like the fire had paused its crackle to listen, like time itself had curled up beside them. When the final note faded, Gideon lowered the harmonica and exhaled. Marin said nothing. She just nodded as though the music had answered questions neither of them had asked aloud. He stood, placed the harmonica gently back in the box, then turned toward the window. That's when he saw it, a footprint, pressed into the fresh snow just beyond the glass. Still crisp edges clean, too fresh to have been there more than minutes. His muscles tightened. He stepped silently to the door, his hand going to the revolver slung beneath his coat. Marin stood too instantly alert, but when he opened the door, nothing. Just snow, trees, silence. Still the footprint remained. The snow had begun to melt around the edges of town, leaving behind thick, dirty slush in the gutters and an air that smelled faintly of thawed earth and regret. Marin stood at the edge of Redgrave Hollow, the once picturesque estate now shadowed by winter's aftermath. Behind her, Gideon held Elia, swaddled and sleepy, while Rowan clung to Marin's coat with one tiny fist. Bristle, limping but alert, stood between them and the looming entrance to the town hall. Marin's breath misted as she looked up at the brick building. Her reflection stared back in the frosted glass doors, tired pale hair pinned up hastily coat, hanging slightly too large around her thin frame. But her eyes were steady. The fear that had once danced just beneath the surface had burned away, replaced by a quiet resolve. The town meeting room was already full. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of townsfolk, some curious, others summoned. Among them sat Mayor Colleen Brooks, a stout woman in her 60s, wiry gray hair swept back in a bun, her expression unreadable, and Sheriff Nestor Pritchard, a tall, broad man with a slow drawl and suspicious eyes that never stopped moving. But all eyes shifted as the Redgraves entered from the opposite side. Franklin Redgrave, Marin's father-in-law, carried the same icy air of command he'd worn since the day she met him. Tall, silver-haired, always dressed in tailored wool and a dark scarf, even when indoors. His wife Lavinia sat beside him in the silence, lips pursed tightly, her gaze darting between Marin and the children with something close to disgust. Beside them, the younger brother Marshall looked uncomfortable, shoulders hunched, one leg bouncing nervously beneath the bench. A brief silence fell as Marin walked down the center aisle, children in tow, Bristle padding beside them. Every step was heavy, not with fear, but with the weight of every night she'd survived the blizzard, every breath her sons still took, and every lie she'd swallowed for too long. Mayor Brooks stood. "Ms. Oakes, you've requested this hearing to contest the Redgrave family's legal guardianship appeal over the children." "I've come," Marin said, her voice firm, "to expose a truth they have buried." She pulled a folded document from her coat and placed it on the desk. "This is Jude Redgrave's will, witnessed, notarized, dated 3 months before his accident. In it, he names me sole guardian of our children. He also states that in the event of his death, I am to remain on the estate until both boys are 18. Gasps rippled through the room. Franklin's mouth tightened, but he didn't speak. I was forced out in the middle of a snowstorm. Marin continued. With no coat, no food, no shoes. They told me Jude never signed anything, that I was nothing but a guest. "Do you have proof?" Sheriff Pritchard asked. Before she could answer, the rear doors of the room creaked open. A figure stepped inside, hunched beneath a thick knit sweater and wool coat scarf flapping as he made his way down the aisle with stiff legs. It was Mr. Bailey, the reclusive old neighbor known mostly for talking to birds and growing bluebells in winter, now stood clutching a brown envelope in one hand and a weather-worn camera bag in the other. "I do," he croaked, voice cracking with age but thick with conviction. Bailey shuffled forward, opening the envelope with trembling fingers. From inside, he pulled a glossy photo, AX10, black and white. It was grainy but clear. Marin clutching both children barefoot in the snow, facing the Redgrave front door as it slammed shut behind her. A hush spread like smoke. Even Mayor Brooks looked stunned. "I didn't mean to photograph her," Bailey added. "I was out that night photographing owls nesting in the pines. But I heard shouting. I turned and I snapped this. I didn't know what else to do." Marin's eyes welled, but she kept her spine straight. Bristle let out a low growl. Across the room, Marshall Redgrave, who had been fiddling with something in his coat pocket, froze. His hand trembled as it hovered near the inside lining of his jacket. The dog growled again, louder this time, and in one swift movement lunged forward. Bristle no. Gideon reached, but it was too late. The dog latched onto Marshall's coat, ripping a deep tear across the breast pocket. A folded paper fluttered out, catching the updraft and landing just at Sheriff Pritchard's boots. The sheriff bent down and unfolded the note. His eyes narrowed. "It's a map," he muttered. "Cabin coordinates, notes on escape routes, code names. Secure the infants. Isolate woman." He looked up sharply. "Planning a retrieval, were you?" Franklin stood abruptly. "This is outrageous." "A mistake, it's not," Marshall muttered, his voice dry with guilt. "He made me. He said they didn't belong to us, that if the will was real, we had to fix it." Gasps again. Lavinia's hand flew to her mouth. Bristle sat calmly beside Marin now, tail still, eyes focused. a guardian not just of children, but of truth. Mayor Brooks raised her hand. I think we've heard enough. The town of Ashwood, nestled in the folds of northern Oregon's pine-covered hills, looked softer in spring. Snow still clung to the high ridges like fading scars, but in the valley tulips peeked from the soil, and children's laughter replaced the howling winds of last year. On the edge of town stood a modest two-story building, half-painted white, half-weathered wood. Hand-carved above the door was a simple sign, The Hearth, Library and Animal Healing House. Inside, the scent of old pages mingled with lavender salve. Bookshelves lined the left wall, stocked with stories of journeys and healing. To the right, soft mats cushioned a sunlit space where dogs, cats, even an injured crow once nursed to health, lounged peacefully. A small examination table tucked neatly near a window bore paw print patterns burned lovingly into its surface. Maren stood behind the front desk, now slightly fuller in frame than she had been that winter. Her face softer, but with eyes still steel-strong. She wore a blue cotton dress smudged with ink and dried herbs, her dark curls pinned back in a loose braid. One hand balanced a teacup, the other trailed absent-mindedly through the hair of Rowan, who sat cross-legged on the floor with a picture book. Elijah lay nearby, chin on Bristle's belly, fingers tracing the dog's ear as he whispered made-up stories. Bristle, older now, bore a permanent limp in his front leg, an old wound never fully healed, but it did not dull his spirit. His coat remained a noble black and ash mix, and his eyes had deepened into something more than canine memory, perhaps. Or quiet warning, or wisdom born of watching humans finally try to deserve each other. Gideon appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket of carrots and seedling herbs from the community garden. His beard was slightly thicker now, but his steps lighter. He wore a tan work shirt rolled to the elbows, sleeves dusted with soil, and his ever-present harmonica peeking from his pocket. "Do you think they'll like the new lemon balm tea?" he asked. "They'll love it," Maren said, smiling. "Everything here grows with purpose." The bell over the door chimed gently. Standing just inside was Catherine Redgrave. Time had softened her too. No longer the nervous girl hiding behind lace and family name, she now wore a dark wool coat, simple, practical, and her strawberry blonde hair was pinned in a neat bun. But her eyes held weight, as if she'd been reading letters that could never be sent. "I hope this isn't unwelcome," she said quietly. Maren rose slowly, Elijah lifting his head to look. "You're not unwelcome," she said. Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out a small drawstring pouch. From it, she withdrew a bracelet worn leather, polished by years of skin and sun. At its center was a copper disc engraved faintly with the letters Wakan. Maren's breath caught. His middle name, Catherine murmured. "Jude's. Father forbade us to speak it. It's Lakota. It means sacred. Our grandmother was from the Pine Ridge tribe. Father erased her, burned all photos, told us it was shameful, but he kept this hidden in his desk." Maren reached out, fingers trembling, and took the bracelet. In that moment, something shifted. Not a forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding, a breaking of a generational chain. "We can find out where she was born," Catherine said. "Trace her line. Give the boys what Jude was never allowed to have." Maren nodded, tears she hadn't expected warming her lashes. "I'd like that." Later that evening, under a cotton candy sky, Maren sat on the porch while Gideon played a soft tune on his harmonica. Rowan and Elijah took turns rolling a ball made from stitched leather scraps across the garden. Bristle limped after them, his steps deliberate, protective. He always stayed closest to Elijah, the child who once barely cried and now hummed songs to the wind. Elijah had begun noticing sounds others missed: the low crack of ice, the whisper of a squirrel's leap, the tone difference in Gideon's footsteps compared to Maren's. And when he closed his eyes, he could still walk in a straight line to the riverbank, as if guided by Bristle's invisible thread. Maren often whispered to herself, "He's teaching him. My son is being raised by a dog who listens better than any man I've known." Inside, the library had grown fuller. Volunteers came, weekly townsfolk, donated shelves and books, and a few young vets in training offered part-time help. Children came not just for stories, but to learn how to hold a rabbit gently, how to bandage a paw, or sit quietly with grief when a bird didn't make it. One evening, Maren caught Bristle standing perfectly still beneath the oak tree near the edge of the woods. His ears twitched toward the tree line, tail low, but not tense. He stared long and hard into the thicket. "What is it?" old friend Marin whispered, standing beside him. Snow had begun falling, just a light flurry. A familiar weightless silence hung in the air. And then a gust. A scent carried on the breeze, the same way Bristle had once turned in the forest to find 3 dying souls in the dark. He looked up at Marin, then back at the forest. And in his eyes she read a message that had no words. They're watching now. Let's show them what loyalty truly means. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, wrapped in fur, limping through snow, or hidden in the eyes of a stranger who chooses to stay. This story reminds us that God often works through the humble and the broken. A wounded dog, a grieving soldier, a mother cast out into the cold. And somehow, through pain and silence, He weaves them together into something stronger than survival, a new beginning. So, if you're going through a season of winter in your own life, if you feel forgotten, exhausted, or alone, remember this. Even in the deepest snow, God sends His messengers, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes in human hands, but always on time. If this story touched your heart, help it reach someone else who might need it today. Share it, leave a comment below, subscribe for more stories of hope, healing, and quiet miracles. And if you believe, like we do, that no one is ever truly alone in God's eyes, type Amen in the comments. And may the Lord bless you and keep you wherever you are, whatever storm you're facing.